Good morning and buenos dias. My name is Liliana Valadez, and out of 27 years of 30 years, I've been serving Dallas ISD. I went to school there, I graduated from there, and I started my career at the same school I went to elementary school. So currently I serve as the Executive Director for Parent Advocacy and Support Services. Walter Scott, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray. You know those names, and you know those stories. African American unarmed individuals killed by police. But I bet you do not know Santos Rodriguez. Santos Rodriguez was a 12-year-old Mexican American boy who was pulled from his home with his 13-year-old brother. They were informally interrogated by police using a tactic called Russian roulette. And on the second bullet, Santos was killed. So as you can imagine, Dallas was in an uprising, racial tension, civil unrest, and there was a march for justice for Santos. And what the Mexican American community felt was that there was a racial prejudice prevalent in Dallas Police Department. So what's important about that? Well, it happened almost 47 years ago in 1973 in Dallas, Texas. The police officer who was convicted was sentenced to 5 years and served 2.5 for an $8 theft from the gas station down the street. So what do we know about that, and what does that tell us? That tells us that how do we go about forming relationships with our families? In large bureaucracies, the police department, our school system, how do we begin to form relationships with our families where we get their trust, or in many cases, repair that trust? So what do we do, and how do we do it? And in changing demographics for Dallas ISD, in 1970, it was about 70% Anglo-American, and then African-American, and then Hispanic. And what we know today is it's 70% Hispanic, about 21% African-American, and the rest is a mixture. So that has been a changing demographic. So many things have changed in Dallas, and many things have changed the same. And you can know that last year, you know the name of both and John. So what do we need to do, and how do we do it? Is building those relationships, and what we know is starts with trust. And with that changing demographic, it's hard work. It's not an easy feat. And I do this as legacy work. Because in 1970, my father, Oscar Valadez, was hired by the superintendent at the time in Dallas to bring a calming to the racial tension that was happening in the city. So he went to work in a high school in Dallas that had been predominantly Anglo, but the changing demographic was now a third Anglo, a third African American, and a third Hispanic. And he was brought because they needed an understanding, and the principal at the time, as you can imagine, was not equipped to deal with the reality of that changing demographic. So what he and his assistant principal, who was African American, did for that community is they built a culture of understanding. They modeled for kids learning together, celebrating together, and with that success, he was tapped to be on what Dallas called a tri-ethnic committee, a committee to serve and address the racial tension in the city. And as a child, I remember Dad coming home very frustrated, very angry, very disappointed. And what I recall is him talking about how some mindsets were not going to change. He felt like there was barriers to that issue that they were trying to resolve and help and support. So this is hard work. So what we learned in this 20-month journey is that there are some things that we can do to help build those trusting relationships with families. And the first thing we found is that we need to listen. The second thing we need to do is embed this in everything we do on a campus. Family engagement is that important. The third thing we need to do is we need to reach out to families where they are. The fourth thing is that we need to have those difficult conversations in our schools. And the fifth thing we need to do is empower our parents around academics. So I'll take the first one, listening. So we did listening tours with our families, and we asked those questions about what they were feeling. Were they feeling welcome? What were those barriers at their schools? And what would they like to see? Because we need family voice in this work. And I'll tell you a story about listening. So last spring, I had a phone call from a parent who needed help with a child at a school, very frustrated, very angry. That interaction at the school was not positive. But in that course of being angry, in that call, she told me to go back to Mexico. She told me to go back across that river. Well, I had never been in Mexico. I never lived there. I don't know that place. Fast forward to the spring, the same parent calls me and would like to meet with me because she was so frustrated. And she was angry and telling me the same things, but I knew that I needed to meet with her in order to help her solve that problem. Now, what I thought to myself, I could hang that person off to someone else in my department to help, but I needed to do this. So I sat down with her. She learned things about me, and I learned things about her. And together, we solved that problem, and she was able to then trust me, because guess what? She knew me on an individual basis. So I say that to say those of us in this room sometimes have the challenge of trying to see through that emotion of that family member, because all they want is for the right thing for their family and their children, and we can help. So we got to look beyond that emotion sometimes. Second thing we need to do is this work needs to be principal-led. So sometimes we hand that work off to a community liaison for them to plan that monthly cultural celebration, right? Well, this is not a monthly celebration. This needs to be embedded in everything we do. It needs to be part of the work every day is engaging our families. Number 3 is that we need to go to families. We can't always expect them to come to the 9:30 a.m. coffee with the principal. Our families are not always available at that time. So we need to go to them. We need to go to their homes, if they allow us to. We need to go to the recreation centers. We need to go to the churches. We need to go to the apartment complexes and meet them where they are, where they feel most comfortable. And we're doing that in Dallas. We are learning how to listen to their hopes and dreams for their children so that teachers can take that information and use that in the classroom to build more relationships. The next thing we need to do is that we need to go beyond professional development. We need to have the difficult conversations on the campus about implicit bias, about assumptions we make about others that don't look like us, don't have the same language, don't worship like we do. We need to have those conversations with our colleagues, and as educators, we need to provide that arena to do that. We need to make sure that we're having those conversations so when our teachers go out and meet with their parents, they are equipped to have those conversations. Because what we don't want as educators making the matters worse. We need to build those relationships. And the last thing we need to do is empower parents. Our parents want to know how to help their children at home. So we need to empower them with what their children are expected to learn in the course of that year, and also help them understand where their child is individually, where they are having successes, and where their challenges. So we need to empower them around the world of academics, around the world that we know. So in doing this work, I see hope. I see hope that parents are allowing us to come to their homes to have those discussions about their hopes and dreams. I also see hope in teachers that are taking those morsels and insight back to the classroom to make a difference for those families and those children. How can they adjust what they're doing in the classroom so that they can build stronger relationships with those children? I see hope in parents wanting to learn what those things are so that they can do things at home, wanting to take home information or materials that can help their children be more successful in school. And I'm finally hopeful that in those conversations, those difficult conversations on campuses, that teachers are willing to be vulnerable to have those conversations for the betterment of the class that they have in front of them. They're learning how to, even as colleagues, work together better and engage families more effectively. So I see that hope. So the challenge today and the call to action is, what do you do in your roles? How do we do things radically different so that the next 50 years don't look like the last 50 years? So I challenge you to think about, what are you going to do? Thank you.